And so the first story that we have in the minefield is the story that everybody and their pet duck has been talking about this week, the Alec Baldwin situation. So for people who are not aware of what happened on there, since my frickin' article is not necessarily working, which is driving me absolutely bonkers, Alec Baldwin unfortunately had a little bit of an accident on the set of his upcoming Western film, Rust. And unfortunately, it ain't good. So for the first time since Brandon Lee, we have had an accidental shooting and death on a movie set. And in this case, it was Helena, what's her last name? The director of photography on Rust.
Helena Hutchins.
She was the director of photography on Rust, and they were in the middle of a rehearsal where I guess the intent was for Alec to do the old Western thing of point the gun at the camera, and that's supposed to be you're seeing things from their perspective. And when he did that, the weapon went off and went through Helena and all the way into the director, who got injured. So we have a death and we have an injury on set. And since that initial story that we got covered, oh boy, the can of worms has been opened on this one. Would either one of you guys like to take that while I take a drink?
Well, I will step in since I've been having to follow this development for a lot of reasons, especially given that we're coming off of the IATSE strike as well, which is when a lot of this stuff started coming out. So some of the developments that have come in the wake of this horrific accident is that it was later revealed during the investigation by the Santa Fe County Sheriff's Office that prior to the accident, a lot of crew members had walked off the set in protest of the working conditions that they were being subjected to.
Yes.
Specifically, the complaints including long hours, long commutes, waiting for their paychecks. This
basically the complaints that we're hearing all across Hollywood right now.
Mm-hmm.
This is no different.
Yep, and so details like that, and a lot of it is that it included much of the camera crew, which is why it was just down to the cinematographer and the director when they were doing this rehearsal.
Yes.
And so that kind of added fuel to the fire, and it very much is one of those cases where it's clear that this was a troubled production, and granted, this next part is purely conjecture, that may have been a contributing factor that led to this unfortunate accident. Because one thing people need to understand when it comes to firearms on set, and this was explained to me by someone that I actually took a weapons safety course with, who that is their job, is to oversee the handling of firearms on set, is that when it comes to prop guns, there isn't really a such thing as a prop gun unless it is a gun that is just meant to be shown but never used. So if it's something that is just meant to be set decoration or in a holster but not meant to actually be fired, that is a prop gun. But when you're doing the types of thing that involves blanks, those are usually real guns, and well, they fire blanks.
In the case of Brandon Lee, because I think this is how it happened with Brandon Lee, even blanks can be dangerous.
Well, kind of what happened is that there's more than one way to make a blank, and with Brandon Lee's case specifically, they did the cheap way, where they took a bunch of bullets
in there.
Yeah, they took a bunch of bullets, they took them apart, and so you had just the blasting cap, which has the gunpowder, which allows you to get these shots fired off. And what happened in the case of Brandon Lee is that after they had fired a few shots for a separate shot that was just meant to be an insert shot, one of the caps was lodged in the barrel. And well, if you have anything in the barrel of a gun and then you have gunpowder discharging
it's coming at you at really fast speeds.
That's basically a bullet now at that point. Yeah. And that's precisely what happened here, is that the bullet that was in the gun that, according to both Baldwin and people on set, because Baldwin was told by the people who handed it to him that, hey, this thing is safe, which made him think,
They even screamed out, because you're supposed to do that on set, cold gun.
Yep.
And so at that point, like, from Alec's assumption, it was supposed to be good. Now, I should point out something really quick. Alec did not check the gun. I will come back to this in a little bit, but the other part of this that I think also needs to be brought in is the other bit of blame that's being handed is Hannah Gutierrez Reed, who is the armorer on the set. Now, I believe she was part of the walkout as well, but we're also starting to learn from other crew members that apparently she has a notorious reputation for being very unsafe with the guns that she has. And specifically what we have is she wasn't very safe with firearms on this set, and also on the previous set she worked on, which was for a series on Hulu. So we should also probably point that stuff out. But again, continue, Romney, because there's so much to go over.
Yeah, that pretty much summarizes that. He was told it was a cold gun, which means he thought it was safe, which means it was a case of, oh, I don't need to check this because they said cold gun, it's safe. And, well, as a result, that's what happened. That's the bullet was fired, and thus the cinematographer lost her life as a result.
Yes.
And so it's a case.
It was a live round that it was in there. And in fact, we've also learned that supposedly this same gun had been being used for target practice on set. So I mean, at that point, it sounds to me like it was never checked to see if there were still any rounds in it or anything like that. And so that also kind of plays into it. And I'm trying to think if there's any other. Oh, this is the other thing that I've had a lot of people get confused on. Alec wasn't just an actor on this. This was being developed by his production company, Russ Productions, I think is what it's called. So he was not just an actor on it, he was the producer on it. So with that being said, I don't know about you, Romney. You've worked on an actual set. I'm guessing Alex has too, but I have always been told whenever I've done any kind of acting on a set, whether I'm being paid or otherwise, if you get handed anything that is dangerous, like a sword or a gun, you check to see if that shit's dangerous. So like if you have a sword, you make sure that it's dull, or that if it's sharp, so you can tell people, okay, yeah, I've got to hold back my punches a little bit. Or in the case of the gun, you check the goddamn barrel or cartridge to make sure there aren't any bullets in it. And this is acting 101. And Alec Baldwin is a 20-plus year acting veteran. He has handled guns many times. And it's very disconcerting to me that every bit of testimony that has come out of this is he did not check the barrel.
Yeah, to that I would add, though, although it is good practice for an actor who is handed such a prop to make sure that it's safe and that if it isn't, they know how to handle it properly. But if you're, say, or have been working in the industry for a while, like it is when anyone works in any industry for 20 plus years, it's very easy to get used to certain things. And so in defense of Alec Baldwin, I could easily see this being him maybe assuming like, okay, well, these are professionals. They know what they're doing. I can trust them.
Oh, I think he did make assumptions here, and that ultimately was his downfall.
Yeah, and that's
and it's a downfall in a number of ways. Like if this was just an acting thing, then yeah, his reputation would be at stake. But now we're talking about his production company. I guarantee you, after this incident, that production company will be gone. It would be dead.
Either that or it's going to basically go under a major overhaul, because probably from his mind, if it's his production company, he probably thought, oh, I hired the person who's supposed to check this. I can trust them. Naturally, that trust is probably shattered as a result of this.
I mean, I could honestly, because if it's his production company, I'm guessing here, that it's being funded by him. And so at that point, considering the amount of legal fees that are probably going to be coming from this, just civil alone, I know that some people are going to point out that yes, there is a criminal investigation undergoing right now, but I'm going just from the civil end. I don't see this company surviving considering the civil litigation costs. Not just the litigation costs, just the regular civil costs drowning Alec.
Yeah, because in terms of any criminal charges, this will probably go the same way that the Brandon Lee incident went, where because of the amount of people involved in the negligence on multiple parties' parts, it would be a case where a prosecutor would be like, okay, there are just way too many people that we would have to prosecute in this case because it's clear that there was negligence on so many people's parts that it's not worth the effort of prosecuting essentially the entire film crew. Because that's what happened with the Brandon Lee incident, is that after the investigation found the levels of negligence, they basically figured it was basically a case of, hey, we would literally have to prosecute every person working on this film on that day, and that would be like 30 plus people. We do not have those kind of resources, so we're just going to let this go.
Speaking of Brandon Lee, I have a question for you on this, because the way I understand... Okay, actually, a couple of questions. Santa Fe County, this is in California, correct?
New Mexico.
It's in New Mexico. Okay, well, then I guess my next question is null and void. Because I was going to say, if it's in California, didn't the Brandon Lee incident instigate legislation in California that basically forbid live ammo being on movie sets?
Well, not really. There wasn't any real laws put into place in that regard. Mostly because live ammunition is still used in a lot of Hollywood productions, even ones that are shot. Granted, there were some changes just down the on kind of the micro level in terms of how unions have the various stipulations, but there were no actual laws put on the books. And another thing to consider is that The Crow was a much smaller production made on a cheaper budget. It wasn't like it was a full-on multi-million-dollar blockbuster. It was,
and I think we've also confirmed that Rust was a bigger budget than Crow. So.
Yeah, and that's the other key difference here, is that this was a case where people were, with Brandon Lee, it was a case where people were trying to do things as cheaply as possible. So they took a gun that was previously used for a different scene that was literally just displayed in a pawn shop, and then made cheap blanks, thinking they were saving money instead of getting the professional ones. But, well, even the professional blanks are dangerous, because people seem to think, oh, it's a blank. There's literally the famous example of the actor who held the gun to his head that was loaded with a blank and fired, thinking, oh yeah, it's just a blank, I'll be fine, and literally blew his brains out because it was gunpowder. Yep. And that propulsion killed him.
Oh, dude, and so, they even tell people, don't be standing to the side because, as people might know, when a gun goes off, there's an explosion. And anybody who's to the side of the gun, to the immediate side of a gun, is going to get that explosion in their face, their chest, or wherever it is.
Yep, and so it's one of those things where there weren't really any laws passed specifically. It was just a case where just a lot of standard practice just changed, where it's like, hey, let's make sure we actually have people who are actively checking guns. And in the case of the Brandon Lee incident, the firearms person had gone home for the day when they were gearing up, because they thought, oh, well, we shot all these insert shots of the gun being fired. I'm pretty much done. These next shots that we need are basically just wide shots. Okay. And, well, this is why you always check your gear. And so, to bring things back to this specific incident, it very much is history more or less repeating itself. It's very much reminded of that old parable of the horseshoe nail, where you see kind of the cascading ripple effects that one moment of negligence can lead to. And, well, sadly, this is an unfortunate effect of that sort of negligence, especially in the wake of what we are seeing in Hollywood right now.
So this is going to be the point where I get to be a little bit of a dictator on my own podcast, because I have a couple of questions that I legitimately want to ask in regards to this situation. And I'm just saying, taking charge. I'm taking my turn first, damn it. It's my sandbox. First of all, without going into the political stuff, but it's fairly well known, Alec Baldwin is very anti-gun. Why was there a live gun on set? I get that for Westerns we want to go authentic, but I would think that if he's so very, 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 very much anti-gun, that he would probably look to, I don't know, films like John Wick and say, oh, here's another way to do it. Why was there a live gun on set?
Well, the short answer is cutting corners. When you look at the Los Angeles Times,
print a revolver?
No, not really. Mostly because 3D printing isn't as cost effective as people think it is. And when you look at the interviews that the LA Times article has with various crew members, corners were being cut. You had people that were non-union being brought in order to continue production during the strike. And so it's one of those cases where the short answer is cheaper. It's cheaper to have a live gun and to basically have live ammo, and making sure that someone ideally who knows what the hell they're doing is doing their part to make sure that it's safe. And honestly, and sadly, that is a common thing even on a lot of professional union productions, because manufacturing fake ammo, 3D printing guns, those aren't quite to the level of being cost effective yet, but I can definitely see this incident inspiring someone to try to come up with something. I've even literally been trying to design a prototype prop gun in response to this, thinking like, okay, is there a way to make a safe prop
correct me
gun?
if I'm wrong. Because when we did the thing for John Wick, like they found a solution. They found a way to be able to. Because I was seeing stuff like on the later movies too. They found ways to be able to. I can't remember if they were 3D printed guns or if they were toy guns, but they did like a little bit of a trick with them where they actually kind of thickened out the barrel a little bit, and basically like made a camera trick where it looked like it was still endless, like the barrel of a gun would be, right? But since it was fake, like they were gonna CG in guns, they were gonna CG in gunshots and sounds and all that stuff, but they never had to worry about that because it was New York, and so at that point they couldn't pull that crap off.
Yeah,
Why was
and
this
that's
not
on.
considered?
Well, again, budget.
Yeah,
And it's also a case where with 3D printing guns, it's a lot easier to do that with modern models of guns, but when you're trying to do
if
vintage
you're gonna do
style,
if you're gonna do something like a single action army, I guess that makes sense because you have multiple parts that you have to 3D print, and that can be a costly endeavor.
Yeah. Like you'd have to 3D print, but then there's also the process of aging and distressing it and making it look real, which again is possible. But if you're trying to do things as cheaply as possible, which from the sounds of
trying
what
to do Unrust,
then that probably wasn't considered an option. They probably thought, oh, we're going to assume everyone knows what they're doing. But, we all know what they say about assumptions.
Yes. This is a question that's actually being brought up via Twitter. So we're dealing with a revolver, which means that in order for a gun to go off, the hammer has to be cocked. So the fact that it went off would make one assume the hammer was cocked. Why was the hammer cocked?
Well, when you go back to the fact that he was told that it was a cold gun, he probably thought, okay, that means there's no bullets in here. And naturally, when you're doing... Yeah, it would be accurate to say that, okay, there's no bullet in here, it's a cold gun. That means if I pull the hammer back and pull the trigger, it'll still get the look of the hammer hitting the back, but nothing will come out. At least that is the assumption. And that's actually another common way a lot of filmmakers do this with revolvers, is that, okay, you have no bullets in, you pull the hammer back, you click, you still get the look of it, and then you can add in the Foley to make it sound like it's actually firing around when it isn't.
Is it also possible, just because obviously it'd probably be a relatively period authentic gun, give or take a decade or two, maybe at worst, but that the gun could just be not necessarily faulty, but considering gun safety mechanisms...
we know it's not faulty.
I mean, gun safety mechanisms have obviously come up... I don't mean faulty like it's necessarily malfunctioning, but just in the way that, over the decades, over the centuries, gun safety mechanisms have improved greatly compared to a revolver made in 1885 or whenever.
Yeah, exactly. Because we're talking about like a Colt or a single action army kind of weapon, which the safety protocols would not be there. Hence why you have the gun education stuff of like, don't put your finger on the trigger and things like that. And this actually kind of leads into another question I have. Okay, I get it that actors would have to go through this, and I get that directors would have to go through this, and the armorer would have to go through this. But it actually disturbed me a little bit that a lot of crew testimony from this is that they had no idea what kind of what gun safety was in any way, shape, or form. And so at this point, I'm going to ask the weird question of, why don't you just have the entire crew all undertake a gun safety course?
Yep.
Because at that point, then somebody can point it out. And you know what? I get that concept. But doesn't it just sound to me like that? Doesn't it just sound to you like that would be Hollywood protocol?
Yeah, you'd think.
Yeah, but sadly, as we've observed over this past year and a half, common sense is not common.
And yep, and it's like Romney has said, it's like a lot of the articles have been pointing out.
And actually,
This is a movie
this is going to be
where
one of the things that is going to be a civil suit is the
Mhm.
shocking amount of people that were not properly educated on guns,
and it's
specifically
just
gun safety.
as it's been mentioned, this was definitely a set where a lot of corners were being cut, and there's just a really gross, negligent breakdown in the whole chain of safety command from
Yep.
the armorer to the assistant director to the producers who hired some of these people.
So I also should point out that another recent development has started to happen, which is kind of expected. If you've ever watched a Law and Order episode, you will expect this to happen in any kind of a murder or anything like that. Is that Alec Baldwin, I believe on Thursday or Friday, after I think it was the Santa Fe County Police Department basically said that everybody was under investigation and that nobody was off the hook yet, and that they were going to be conducting a full criminal investigation into this, Alec Baldwin did what a lot of people expect Alec Baldwin to do. He blamed everybody else. And so at that point you had that, and specifically one of the people that he blamed was the armorer, Hannah Gutierrez Reed, who in turn blamed him. And all that. So basically, people pointing fingers at each other. And again, considering the history that we're now finding out about Hannah Gutierrez Reed, do we see, okay, let's just say for the sake of argument, this doesn't go to criminal. And I can already see Alec Baldwin's production company being brought in for civil trial and all that. Do we see any kind of penalty or any kind of punishment going towards this armorer because of the amount of incompetence that we're hearing on her end?
I'd say she's never working in Hollywood again.
Indeed.
I'd hope so, because it sounds to me like she's more interested in working on her TikTok career than working on an actual movie set.
Well, and plus, considering that this was her second major production, yeah, and especially considering that she was the daughter of a veteran armorer who
I feel bad
worked
for
in the
this
industry.
guy, because now his name is getting dragged through the mud because of her.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so looking at this, in terms of any actual legal ramifications, if, say, for the sake of example, if a grand jury chose to indict her on negligence charges, that would be most that she would get, and again, it would just be criminal negligence. It wouldn't necessarily, it might lead to some jail time. It really depends on the nitty-gritty of it, since this wouldn't necessarily fall under a criminal case.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Romney. Accidental death is a civil charge, right? It's not a criminal charge.
It can be.
It can be, depending on a lot of different factors between certain laws in a state where the
way
incident
I understood
occurred.
It was that accidental death, when it goes into the criminal concept, it just becomes manslaughter at that point.
Yeah, and so that's why I mentioned the part of the grand jury, is that if the prosecuting attorney decides to convene a grand jury and presents a case saying, hey, is this person liable for negligence in this particular incident, and the grand jury decides, yes, this armorer is liable, then it would basically be treated as criminal negligence and carry those sorts of charges, which usually result in fines, not necessarily jail time. And so in terms of legal stuff, that's probably the most I see happening. But in terms of union-wise, in terms of industry-wise, like Alex said, she is probably never getting work on a film set again as an armorer. If she decides to, say, goes more the grip route and be like, okay, I'm just going to work with grips, maybe. But that's a very big if, and that would...
I don't know. Given the incompetence history that we're hearing about her, I don't see her getting any kind of a job in Hollywood.
Yeah. Unless she sticks with non-union productions.
I don't even think indie filmmakers would hire her at this point.
Unless they're desperate.
She's basically nuclear.
Yeah, it's very much a case they probably would hire out of desperation, but there are only certain types of productions that cut corners to that degree. But again, given what we were hearing about this particular set, this was probably one of them.
Yeah. So let's kind of turn the focus a little bit towards Alec Baldwin. I honestly don't know if I see criminal charges happening, but I definitely think civil charges are going to happen. And even though I know he has been in contact with Helena's husband, I do actually see... I think it's still a good idea for Helena's husband to sue for accidental death. Because at that point, then, because I don't want to be this kind of guy. Like, I want to be the guy to say that Alec is being penitent, but part of me is also like, well, he's going to have to deal with a number of other things, and I would want to make sure that the family of the recently departed still gets what should be coming to them, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I could totally see Alec dodging that because he sees everything else falling down around him.
Yeah. Looking at this in terms of what will likely happen in that case, if the husband files a suit, I can see Alec trying to settle this out of court as quickly as
Which
possible.
He
I mean,
should.
both from a moral standpoint and just from a business standpoint, it makes the most sense. You come to some sort of settlement, you cover the funeral costs, you cover any other expenses.
If he actually does feel bad, he'd do that. And if he doesn't, he's an absolute scumbag. I think we'd all agree on that.
Mhm.
Yeah. And so that's likely what's going to happen. In terms of any charges that he might face, it would pretty much be in the same sort of vein where it would basically be, well, in his case, he might fit an accidental manslaughter charge, but even then, given the circumstances, it's kind of one of those. I could
easily see that being pleaded down to criminal negligence,
and not even a plea deal. I can also just even see a DA thinking, okay, because of the circumstances, is this even worth prosecuting?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's another factor of this, is that when it comes to charges that come before a judge, well, when it gets to that point, that means that a prosecuting attorney has made the choice to file and press the charges. And I can see the DA thinking, okay, yes, there is a case here, but one, with Alec Baldwin being Alec Baldwin, if he tries to fight this could be a very long drawn out sort of case. But it's also a case of, would I be able to convince a jury to convict him based on what we know about the case thus far, especially considering how much media attention it's getting? That would make jury selection a nightmare.
Okay, here's another interesting one, and I'm gonna pose it to Alex first.
Okay.
Do we see that age is going to play in any kind of a justifiable defense for Alec?
Age? Are you saying like
his age?
I can't see why that would come up, really.
Because I've already started to see people speculating that they're basically going to say, well, he's older, so he must be detached. He's out of touch, kind of thing. And I don't think he's that old. So
he's only 63.
So at that point, I don't see that flying, unless we see evidence that he's clearly suffering from dementia, kind of thing.
Yeah, in which case that would only really make things worse.
I mean, we're going to see symptoms from him. I mean, we've already if people have looked at the pictures, there's already a picture of him like with a mask kind of dangling from his ear as if he's been throwing up, which I would imagine happened. Because you do that, and that's not a pleasant experience. But so I think he is going to be emotionally shook up. But I don't think that. I mean, aside from him being a jackass on Twitter, I don't see him being incompetent in this regard, like mentally incompetent.
Yeah, given his age and just the fact that he was still actively working, I don't even see his lawyer pursuing that as a defense because, well,
I would hope not. I think it'd get laughed out of court.
Yeah, like pretty much if they tried that, that would basically, again, assuming that they were able to select a jury, any juror would basically go like, that's bullshit.
Yeah.
We know that's bullshit because it's Alec frickin' Baldwin. And so the age defense wouldn't really work here. I don't really see that even really being considered a factor.
So, just to kind of wrap this up, because this is kind of the last question that we have, and then we can get final thoughts. I've also seen this kind of bounce around, and so I want to bring it up to you guys. A lot of people are assuming that with the police department's announcement that they are going to conduct a criminal investigation, that they might have already found something that they think indicates foul play. I personally think since this is a high-profile case, this is the police department doing everything that they can to stay on procedure, because already, police departments were in the hot spotlight over the last couple of years. So at that point, they're doing it for that reason. But Do you guys think that? Do you think that they've already found something that might indicate foul play?
No.
No.
Like you said, this is not even just factoring in, the scrutiny that police departments have been under. Things like this, it is always standard operating procedure.
Yeah.
Whenever, as someone who
Yeah,
literally
they're going to
spends
have a
much of
microscope put on them. They have to do everything by the book. If they don't,
well, yeah,
it's going to play back on them.
well, yeah, and even putting the scrutiny aspect aside, as someone who spends most of his day listening to police scanners, whenever there's any sort of accident or unattended death, there's always a criminal investigation, because it's a case where an officer has responded. That's just standard procedure. It's not even we found something, or someone's being charged. It's just like, hey, we were told of this. We're going to investigate it because that's what we do, because a firearm was involved.
Every time you say that you have to listen to a police scanner, I immediately go to the scene of Mr. Incredible and Frozone listening to a police scanner to find crimes to save people from. And so, I immediately go into that case. It's just I could see Romney in the car just kind of messing with it, going, do you see a fire? Yes, let's go take on a fire. Sorry.
Yeah, except it's not nearly as exciting, and there's a lot of false starts, and oftentimes there are just some things that you hear that may be big, but for ethical reasons, a news station will choose not to report on. I mean, for the sake of example, one thing that my station, we never report on, if we hear about it, is if it's a suicide attempt, we don't report on it, because a little thing called the Werther effect is a factor.
Yeah.
And so it's one of those cases where, to get back on point, because a firearm was involved, because somebody died, them announcing that they're doing a criminal investigation is just standard operating procedure for really any police department. This would happen if this happened in Utah. This would happen if this happened in New York. Because a firearm was involved and because someone died, there always is an investigation. And so, yeah, this is just them. It's business as usual. It's not that, they found something. It's that, hey, a firearm was involved. Someone lost their life. We have to investigate because that is our job.
And then just give your final thoughts on this one, Romney.
Honestly, it's a tragic accident, but it also kind of proves the adage of, if you buy cheap, you get cheap. If you try to cut corners and try to basically do things as cheaply as possible, crap like this happens. This is why you can't half-ass it. Even if you're an indie filmmaker doing a non-union production, it goes back to the same example. If you buy cheap, you get cheap.
Yeah, exactly. And my personal hope is that with the stuff that we are hearing, because there's a reason I said that it was par for the course from all the other accusations that we've heard of other productions over the last 1 to 2 years. Hopefully this opens a huge door in places like SAG-AFTRA and the Cruise Guild to start addressing this. To either figure out ways to be able to do this and be able to make it cost effective or something. Because I don't see this just quietly going into the night kind of thing.
And especially considering that this happened literally.
And if it does, then it just shows how ignorant Hollywood is.
Well, yeah, again, the timing couldn't be any more unfortunate, because again, we had the narrowly averted IATSE strike where film crews were literally walking off, and that was part of the reason why non-union people were brought into the production of Rust, was because, we want to keep making our movie. And it's just because of it's literally this stuff, this accident kind of proves IATSE's point of saying, hey, this is why you shouldn't, try to shortchange us and work us to the bone and pay us peanuts, because crap like this happens when you don't have professionals here.
Yeah. Alex, your final thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I've been following the story also quite a bit, and it's a sheer mess of absolute incompetence from the whole chain down. It's astounding how much when it was an accident waiting to happen, and it's sad that somebody had to lose their life for it. So people are going to have to pay. They're going to have to pay up a lot here, and definitely things are going to have to really change, on sets. Small,
I can already tell you, Alec Baldwin's life is going to be going through a lot, and I'm not just talking financially.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's just things have got to start changing in the industry. They got to stop being reckless, and they got to start being careful. You're gonna use firearms. If you're gonna use real firearms, you know, you gotta treat them like you would anything dangerous. These are dangerous weapons. These are dangerous items. Whether you have blanks, whether you have dummy rounds, just you gotta be careful and you gotta use your heads. You gotta use common sense. And I hope this can be a learning lesson.
Okay. My final thoughts are pretty much on par with everything that's been said here. It's a tragic accident. You never like. I actually did go back and look into this because I'm like, there's no possible way that this could be the first incident that's happened since Brandon Lee, and no, it is the first incident since Brandon Lee. And I remember when that happened, and it was just, I can't do this without cursing. It's fucked up.
Yep.
All in every sense of the word. And the fact that you're hearing of all the corners that were cut, and we're finding out more information as the days go on, it just gets even more horrid. I don't like Alec Baldwin as a real person. I think he's an immature scumbag, but I respect him as an actor. And at this point, I've lost a lot of respect just because of the fact that he got so used to routine that he stopped doing the things that are essential. Because if it were me, if it were like with family or anything, I wouldn't ever stop checking the barrel. I would never stop checking the cartridge, because any given day can be a change for the worse or the better. And so at that point, I have lost a lot of respect for him, but I also feel for what he's about to go through, and that it's probably necessary for him. This is going to be a very humble process for him. He's going to have to acknowledge that he's made some horrible mistakes now in this case. And so I hope nothing but the best for him, and I hope that he truly does learn from this.